Okay, Eisbock. Such a weird beer. I'm only familiar with 2 examples of this style that are currently available in the St. Louis area. One from Kalmbacher and one from our friends at Schneiderweiss. There are other ice beers out there that you may be familiar with, but they are not Eisbocks. I'm talking, of course, about the more bang for your buck school of beers that include Ice House, Bud Ice, Bush Ice, Natty Ice, etc. But Eisbock, in addition to tasting very different from these beers, is also very strong. Like, Bud Ice is 5.5%, which is a typical ABV for an ice beer. Schneider's Aventinus Eisbock more than doubles that, clocking in at a whopping 12%. And it tastes way better than a Natty Ice could ever hope to taste. The main difference between this highly regarded beer style and the Bud Ices of the world is that Eisbock, as you may have guessed from its name, is a Bock beer. A Bock is a strong, caramel-colored malty lager. It will usually have a strong flavor of dark fruit like plums or prunes or raisins. A far cry from the thin pisswater flavor of an ice house. Eisbock is essentially a Doppelbock that undergoes the extra process of freeze distillation, so it has a lot of similar characteristics to a Doppelbock. Those macro brews were more of a marketing gimmick than anything. While that and freeze distillation accelerates the lagering process, meaning they could kick out ice beers even faster. Back in the mid-90s, Bud Ice became known for its ads featuring the Bud Ice Penguin, a creepy little fucker who stalked people while singing the opening bit from Strangers in the Night. You never knew where he would pop up. In the backseat of your car, on a train, in your house. I think he was actually in a radio in one of them, pretending to be the radio announcer. The 90s were a strange time. The origin story of Eisbock also comes from the 90s, but this time it's the 1890s. The legitimacy of the tale is questionable, of course, but it has become widely accepted as the genesis for the style. I'm bringing it up now instead of during the history section because it is more of a legend than a historical fact. It's like the phrase, armed to the teeth. It comes from the 1600s or whatever, when pirates were a real problem for sailors. These pirates would loot ships and cause havoc, but their guns were very primitive, not good for more than 1 shot per gun. There was no time to stop and reload when you're raiding a ship, so these pirates would have a gun in each hand, more in their pockets and in their belts or whatever, but when their guns were all empty, they would also have a knife in their teeth to finish the job, supposedly. Hence, they were armed to the teeth. Which is a great story, it paints a vivid picture of a savage, filthy pirate who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. To get that sweet, sweet booty. But as far as accuracy goes, who knows? That's how I feel about this Eisbock story. It's a good story. But the reality of it is something that is unverifiable. But anyway, enough preamble. The story goes that one cold winter evening in Bavaria, a German brewery employee was tasked with bringing a barrel of Bock beer inside after a long day of work. The worker, cold and worn out, without anyone to help him, decided that it would be better to leave the barrel out in the cold rather than try to move it in his weakened state and end up breaking the barrel. What's the worst that could happen, he thought. When the head brewer arrived the next morning, the beer had frozen, busting the barrel in the process. The head brewer was furious. He started to chip away at the ice to discover that the beer had not frozen all the way through. There was still liquid in the middle of the ice. He decided that a fitting punishment for his lazy employee would be to make him drink the dark liquid. Surely this strange brown syrup would taste awful, and the employee would learn not to shirk his responsibilities again. His plan backfired, though, because the beer that was left in the barrel was not only rich and delicious, but it was also strong and invigorating. And so the Eisbock was born. Again, supposedly. It's a nice story, and instead of getting a silly idiom like armed to the teeth, we got a boozy, malty new beer style. Way better result, in my opinion. So let's dive in, I guess. The overall impression in the BJCP says, a strong, full-bodied, rich and malty dark German lager, often with a viscous quality and strong flavors. Even though flavors are concentrated, the alcohol should be smooth and warming, not burning. Yeah, that's a good point. These beers can get up to 12% alcohol, sure, but they're never harsh. They won't smell like nail polish remover. They are always smooth. Boozy, yes, but smooth. The aroma of an Eisbock is fully dominated by the smell of alcohol and a rich, intense maltiness. You're not going to get any hops from this one, like zero. You'll likely get some dark fruit esters, and they will likely be quite significant. These esters will come from the malt, though, not the yeast, like in a triple or a Weiss beer. That nail polish remover smell I was talking about is an issue you'll run into sometimes when you ferment too hot. It's really sharp and harsh, and it's mostly an issue when you try to make high-gravity beers like this. Well, not like Eisbock necessarily, but like a Doppelbock or a Belgian Dark Strong Ale or something. But this is one of those off flavors that can totally derail your beer. You can't drink 5 gallons of fucking acetone, you know? If it's just like a bit too much diacetyl or whatever, you can power through. But this one is a beer killer, for sure. Maybe Thomas will have some tips for us on how to avoid such a costly mistake. Appearance-wise, Eisbock is deep copper to dark brown in color. It will typically have some nice ruby highlights. It is a lager, so it should have some nice clarity too. It has a kind of off-white head, but with a high alcohol content, and just the process of making this beer, it really doesn't have much in the way of head retention. And the guidelines here talk about it having pronounced legs, but legs don't matter, so I'm just gonna move past that one. As far as flavor goes, Eisbock has a rich, sweet maltiness. It is not hoppy at all, not even a little bit. There are hops in it, sure, but they just balance out the sweetness a touch. Just enough to keep it from being cloyingly sweet. The alcohol content does about as much as the hops to balance the sweetness. Okay, the leg thing is bugging me now. So, people mostly talk about legs in reference to wine. When you swirl your wine in the glass, there are little streaks that drip back down. These are the legs. People claim that this is a way to gauge the wine's quality, or sweetness, or viscosity, and it's not. The only thing it relates to is the alcohol content, and there are far easier ways to deduce this information than swirling the shit around and trying to divine the ABV just through the legs. Just read the fucking bottle. It will tell you the ABV. If you see some jackass trying to look erudite by analyzing a wine's legs, please call them out on their bullshit. People like that need to be put in their place. In regards to Eisbock, it has pronounced legs because it has a lot of alcohol in it, which you already know because this is one of the defining characteristics of the style. There. Back to something relevant. Eisbock will exhibit a lot of malt-derived dark fruit esters like black currants or prunes. That maltiness can exhibit some Maillard characteristics as well, which just means it will taste toasty or like caramel or maybe chocolate. The Maillard reaction is this chemical reaction that occurs when you cook with sugar. It's not sugar caramelization, but rather a browning of the sugar. That's, again, a really dumbed down version. It's a way of creating new flavor compounds, and it is evident in tons of different foods. Toasting bread, for instance, creates Maillard characteristics. Also, roasting meat. Kilning malts at varying temperatures can create different flavors, and they're all the result of the Maillard reaction. Man, I keep getting thrown off on tangents here. Maybe Eisbock was not the best style to get into this early in the podcast. To close out the flavor description of an Eisbock, its finish will be dry in comparison to the initial taste. That dryness comes from the alcohol. It should never be syrupy or sticky, and it is a lager, so it should finish nice and clean. The mouthfeel will be full-bodied, lager or not. It's a big beer. It won't have much in the way of carbonation. It will have a definite warming alcohol presence, but it won't be sharp. It should be warm, not hot, and very smooth. You don't want any harsh alcoholic bitterness or fusel alcohol or other concentrated flavors. Now, the freeze distillation process, or fractional freezing, or jacking, as it is sometimes called, is a fairly straightforward concept. Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Ethanol freezes at negative 173.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you take a 7% Doppelbock and lager it around 15 degrees Fahrenheit, the water will freeze and separate out from the beer, leaving you with a roughly 10% Eisbock. Often, Eisbocks benefit from additional lagering after the freezing process, the jacking, if you will, to smooth them out and enhance the flavor. Some brewers have taken fractional freezing to extreme lengths in order to produce the strongest beer in the world. There is Schwarzbrau 57, which is made, no surprise, by Schwarzbrau and comes in at, again, no surprise, 57% ABV. Then there's the End of History from Brewdog, which is 55% ABV. They only made 12 bottles of that one, which has the distinction of being the only beer whose bottle came wrapped in a real squirrel hide, like a roadkill koozie. You'll just have to do an image search on that one, because my personal lexicon is insufficient to properly describe that madness with mere words. But the most alcoholic beer in the world is currently Brewmeister Snake Venom, coming in at a whopping 67.5% ABV. That's 135 proof. That's barrel strength bourbon levels of alcohol. That's fucking George T. Stagg proof. It's impressive, sure, but is it necessary? I think maybe not. I don't have much in the way of history to talk about. I told you the legend of how Eisbock came to be. That's really all there was to find about the history of the style. It's a German style, obviously. Its characteristic ingredients are the same as a Doppelbock, so Vienna malt, maybe some Munich malt, Saaz hops, or something similarly mild and earthy. Lager yeast, of course. It is yet another old school beer that traditionally uses decoction mashing. Despite the similarities and the use of similar ingredients, Eisbock is not just a stronger Doppelbock. The name refers to the process, the jacking process. You can technically have a regular Doppelbock that is stronger than an Eisbock. It's just that Eisbock is made with that extra step, that freeze distillation. That's the most important distinction. Eisbock also shares some characteristics with wheat wine, but an Eisbock shouldn't be quite as thick or rich as a wheat wine. When you get down to the nitty-gritty, the vital statistics, Eisbock has an IBU range from 25 to 35. It may not be readily apparent because the beer is so sweet, but those IBUs are what saves this beer from being straight syrup, so they are an important piece of this particular beer pie. Ugh, that sounded better in my head. I apologize. SRM ranges from 18 to 30, which would be light brown to very dark brown. So from a Beyonce to more of a Jaimin Hunsu. Is that racist? I feel like that may have been mildly racist. If you're offended by mild racism, I am sorry. I'm just trying to think of different ways to describe shades of brown. That has the potential to get very repetitive going forward. Anyway, that's IBUs and SRM, so ABV. This is a big beer, so its range is easily the highest at 9 to 14% alcohol. And if you wanted to, you could push that even higher. You could break the record and make the next world's strongest beer if you put your mind to it. Just remember that someone still has to drink that shit. There's not a lot in the way of commercial examples on this one. I think the two main ones, at least in St. Louis, like I said, are the Schneiderweiss Aventinus Eisbock and the Kalmbacher Eisbock. Schneiderweiss makes a wheat Doppelbock called Aventinus. It's in a 500ml bottle, but then they make the Eisbock version of the Aventinus, and that's in a 12-ounce bottle, or in an 11.2-ounce bottle, maybe. Point is, make sure you get the right Aventinus. When I search for Eisbock on Beer Advocate, those are the two with the most ratings by far. So it looks like those are the two to be on the lookout for, the Kalmbacher and the Schneiderweiss. Cool. That's going to do it for the style breakdown. I'm going to take a break, and we're going to talk homebrewing with Thomas for a little bit. Stay tuned.